A good day, hello everyone, and a warm welcome. Very quickly, I put out a video. Well, I didn't put out a video yesterday. I made a video yesterday. I'm going to release it after this one for anybody who wants to watch that as well. I don't think it was particularly good, I'll admit, but it does contain some quite interesting truths about Papias nonetheless. This is going to be a video that I think is just slightly better, and it's compact, and it will explain I think every aspect of Papias that you ever wanted to know, so you can use this information if anyone ever raises Papias's name, and you'll know that he's not a particularly good witness to anything to do with early 2nd century Christianity, and in fact lots of the things that he conveys through Eusebius and Irenaeus are no good to the historicity argument. So let's have a little look and see what we can find. The introduction here, so the lost oracles, okay, and this and his canon, a complete reconstruction. This is called. So Papias of Hierapolis, early 2nd century CE, wrote a 5-volume work titled Expositions of the Sayings, Logia, of the Lord. Today the work is almost completely lost. What survives comes only through quotations or paraphrases by later authors, chiefly Eusebius of Caesarea in Ecclesiastical History 339, and a smaller set of from Irenaeus of Lyon in Against Heresies 533. This essay presents a clearly and this systematically and clearly all the direct. So we'll just go through. It's not going to be a particularly long video, I hope. The meaning of logia, and what this implies, these oracles. The title of Papias's work was the 5 books of expositions of the Lord's logia. Okay, the key word logia here, this unusual Greek meaning. In classical and Hellenistic Greek, this means oracular sayings, prophetic utterings, divine declarations, used for the Delphic oracles, Sibylline prophecies and inspired utterances. So this word was used quite a lot, but it was always in the context of divine utterances, mystical sayings and things of that nature. The Jewish and Christian usage here is also extant. So in the Septuagint, Philo, Josephus, and early Christians, the oracles of God in Romans 3:2, Psalms 12 and 12:6 as well in the Septuagint. So it is in the Septuagint. Also a technical term for prophetic inspired mystical sayings. Papias logia of the Lord thus naturally means the oracular sayings of Jesus, in whatever manifestation that might have been as well. Papias isn't really that clear. Not a narrative biography or gospels. Okay, so Papias never ever talks about that really, and nothing he says would have garnered any of that kind of meaning. And given that he wrote a huge 5-volume work, hundreds and hundreds of pages, maybe thousands, who knows, and that none of it was saved, and that nothing else comes through Eusebius here, chiefly Eusebius, is very strange indeed. He would have been a trove. I think Christians would have saved this if it had contained important information, but we're going to find it didn't. All surviving Papias material now, the total count, all genuine Papias material comes from 2 authors, of course. The 7 direct quotations from Eusebius, and these are Papias's actual words as well. And from Irenaeus, only 1 direct quotation, the Millennial Vine Oracle. Now both of them contain this, so I think it's actually 6 if we take Eusebius, and then this 7th being this vine miracle. So total unique Papias quotations here, again 7 to 1. And so the 7 direct Papias quotes here. So we're going to go through them. It's worth doing. It won't take too long. Eusebius, remember, Ecclesiastical Histories 3:39. They're fairly brief, most of these. Papias says he preferred oral tradition over written works. Questioned anyone who had known the elders, so not necessarily the disciples or apostles. He was probably a bit too late for that. Sought sayings from people who had heard what Andrew, Peter, Philip, Thomas, James, John, Matthew, and others had said. So he is naming disciples here, though. This shows Papias relied on second-hand oral rumour, not eyewitness testimony. So these names would have been going around in early Christian sects. It's fairly reasonable to say that by the 110s, 130s when he was writing this out. It's hard to pin him down exactly when he was writing. The list of elders and the 2 Johns here. So Papias distinguishes John the Apostle in the first list here of disciples from John the Presbyter, still alive in his day. So this John the Presbyter was not, and Ariston, and he's not John the Apostle. And Eusebius acknowledges this as well. He's talking about 2 Johns here. And this causes major problems for late claims about apostolic authorship of the fourth gospel. Okay, so who wrote the 4th gospel is a question, interesting question. The Mark tradition, not in order. Papias quotes the presbyter saying, Mark wrote down accurately what he remembered, but not in order. Okay, since he had not followed Jesus directly and Peter's preaching was not chronological. This contradicts later claims about gospel inerrancy and a perfect harmony, okay? Again, not in order. Well, Mark, we have, of course, in order. And what was he? What he remembered here? He's remembering it from Peter, we'd assume. So what is that? We don't know. The Matthew tradition, logia in Hebrew. Now, Papias' most famous statement here. This is the one that's used by lots of Christians. Matthew composed the logia in the Hebrew dialect, and each interpreted them as best he could. This does not say Matthew wrote a Hebrew gospel. It refers to oracular sayings, not a narrative text. And Matthew, as you'll find in, I focus on this a lot in the next video, Matthew is not writing in Hebrew or Aramaic in Matthew's gospel. He's actually copying Mark massively, and it's all written straight into Greek. So that's not Matthew's gospel that we have. This is not that. It couldn't be. The millennial vine oracle. Papias recounts a visionary apocalyptic prophecy. Vines with 10,000 branches. Grapes producing huge quantities of wine. Clusters that speak to the saints. This is mystical prophetic material, not historical tradition, and it comes straight out of 2nd Baruch as well. This vine oracle. So it's apocalyptic, apocryphal material from Judaism, and you can find that this quote it's the same thing. The grotesque death of Judas. Papias proclaims here. Jesus' body swelled enormously, his eyes bulged shut, his genitals oozed pus and worm. The place of his death stank horribly. This contradicts the Gospels and reads like punishment folklore. Now, this place evidently exists in Jerusalem. There's the field of Judas, or I can't remember what it's called. This has nothing to do with the Gospel narratives. He doesn't jive with any of them. So Justice Bar-Sabbas surviving poison. Justice drinks deadly poison and is unharmed. A miracle tale consistent with charismatic folklore. Again, nothing of this surviving poison is retained in any of the Gospels or Acts. It's not there. The only direct Papias quote from Irenaeus now, against heresy 533. Irenaeus quotes Papias' millennial vine oracle again, and this is in Eusebius, so it's not It's not another quote, it's just the same thing. Yes, he doesn't preserve any quotation besides this oracle. He does state incorrectly, based on Eusebius' reconstruction, that Papias was a hearer of John, though. But this is not a quote from Papias. And which John? People often confuse John the Apostle with John the Presbyter. It's actually the Presbyter, whoever he might have been. He's probably a mystical Gnostic Christian, honestly. How the two authors' quotations compare, overlap. Both Eusebius and Irenaeus here quote the divine prophecy. Differences: Eusebius provides 6 additional quotations not found in Irenaeus. Eusebius gives paraphrases and comments. Irenaeus mostly does not. Irenaeus treats Papias as an authority. Eusebius calls him a man of very little intelligence. Total counts: Eusebius 7, and Irenaeus 1, so a total of 7 Papias fragments here. A mystical oracular nature of Papias is fragments. Clearly mystical, oracular, or visionary. So Matthew's Logia, again, the name means visionary stuff. Millennial, quotation, grotesque death of Jesus, again, nothing gospel about that. Justice, Barabbas miracle, again, no gospel mention of this. Non-mystical but deeply revealing here. The preface of an oral tradition. 2 Johns and the Mark tradition, again, nothing to do with Mark or Matthew. And Mark is copied by Matthew in Greek, nothing to do with Aramaic. We don't have that anymore. What did it contain? Is it even there? Thus, over half of Papias' surviving direct words are mystical, apocalyptic, or miraculous in nature. Now, he does talk about some of the apostles, and this would be in 110, maybe 130, something like that. But this is in the 2nd century. There are no surviving details about any of the 12 disciples we can find in the 1st century, perhaps maybe barring Clement the First, and he talks I think he maybe references Peter as a fellow, probably again perhaps Gnostic Christian. My Papias work was lost. Despite claiming to record Jesus' sayings, Papias' work disappeared because Papias was considered unreliable, obviously. His content was seen as incredulous and folkloric. His theology became an embarrassment. Papias was a literal millenarian, so later orthodoxy rejected this. Millenarianism being the apocalypse is nigh. The apocalypse is coming right around the corner. Of course, Jesus says the same, so many Christians would have been like this. He contradicted canonical structure. So Mark, again, not in order. Well, that's not what we have in Mark. Matthew writing a logia, not a gospel. 2 different Johns, obviously, and a reliance on hearsay. He only relied on people might have said in pubs or something like this. Who knows who they were? This is why Eusebius likely thought his work was just Papias. No, I'm not sure if there's any etymology there, but his content was apocryphal and visionary, folkloric, again, grotesque punishments and this extravagant prophecies, not useful to early Christianity. A non-liturgical or doctrinal use, so his work was never used in catechesis, liturgy, or doctrinal teachings. Without scribal copying, ancient books simply perished in this time as well. So there is if there was anything useful in it, it would probably have been caught up and respectfully copied and so on. Complete list of all direct quotes with exact wording. So we have the direct quotes here. You can check them out. I'll give you the second here. So the 2 Johns and the elders. So what Andrew and Peter said, or what Philip or Thomas or James or John or Matthew or any other of the Lord's disciples said, and whatever Ariston and the presbyter John, the Lord's disciples, were saying. Okay, and quote, this is what he was interested in here. This is the third one as well. This also the presbyter said. Mark, having become Peter's interpreter, wrote down accurately everything he remembered, though not in order, of the things said or done by the Lord, for he had not heard the Lord nor followed him, but later, as I said, he followed Peter, who used to give his teachings as circumstances demanded, but not making an ordered arrangement of the Lord's sayings. So Mark committed no error while he thus wrote down some things as he remembered them. For he made it his own concern not to omit anything he heard or to falsify anything in them. Of course, this doesn't exist. Whatever this Mark might have written down, it is not in. It can't be the Mark that we have. It is not. It is not that text. The Mattheologia. So then Matthew composed a logia in the Hebrew dialect. This is the fourth quote, and each interpreted them as best he could. Again, Matthew is basically copying Mark, so this is not true. This is the monstrous death of Judas. This is the last one I'll quote. Judas walked about in this world, a terrible example of impiety. His flesh so swollen that where a wagon passed easily, he could not pass. His eyelids swelled so greatly that he could not see the light, but a doctor could see through them by forcing them apart. His genitals were loathsome and flowed with pus and worms. After many tortures and pains, he died in his own place, and the area is deserted and uninhabited even now because of the stench. No gospel, Matthew, I think he just goes and hangs himself. So yes, addendum here. Although Irenaeus cites Papias only once, he describes him only once. The function of these references is clear and historically significant. Irenaeus invokes Papias not because Papias provides strong evidence, but because Irenaeus needs Papias to supply apostolic credibility that he otherwise cannot demonstrate. So important. The following points summarize the most relevant historical observations. Irenaeus had no independent evidence of his claims. So he's writing in 180, and he has very little to work from. He's probably making a lot of stuff up. You can't trust Irenaeus. Irenaeus is the earliest writer to assign the four canonical gospels to their names. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That these four alone are authentic and apostolic as well. Promote literal chiliasm, a physical 1,000-year kingdom. Okay, all right, that's great. I didn't even know that. I know about the 1,000-year kingdom, didn't know what it was called. Assert apostolic chains of custody for doctrine and text. Insist Polycarp received teachings from John the Apostle, and claim Papias was a hearer of John. For nearly all of these points, Irenaeus provides no external evidence, only assertions. Thus, he repeatedly uses earlier figures as anchor witnesses to backfill apostolic legacy. And my video on the apostolic heritage here, the apostolic succession, shows this. It's really bad. And there's a confusion between these two Johns. And who was this John? He was probably nothing to do in this early time with a dude who knew any of the gospel materials. It just doesn't seem likely. Why Papias is mentioned at all? Because he supports one of Irenaeus' doctrinal needs. Irenaeus cites exactly one passage from Papias, the millennial vine prophecy. This prophecy provides Irenaeus with evidence for literal millenarianism. Millennialism, the doctrine he is defending at that moment. In Baruch, in 2nd Baruch, immediately after quoting the oracle, Irenaeus declares Papias the hearer of John and companion of Polycarp. So there's This is one of the most important lines in early Christianity because it gives us, 200 years before Irenaeus, or 100 and something years there, it gives us a link between Polycarp and John, and then the 2nd century Christians. If we didn't have that link, we would not know much at all, and there would be no link. There would be a chronological chasm here, a creedal gap. And this is a rhetorical move. If Papias is a hearer of John, then Papias is prophecy, apostolic teaching. If Papias is a Polycarp's companion, then Irenaeus inherits that chain himself, right? So he has now authority. This is strategic apostolic proximity, not historical precision. And so Polycarp, of course, in Irenaeus as a young child was a hearer of Polycarp, or sat with Polycarp or something like that, as Irenaeus says. Who knows though? It's very tenuous. Papias never claimed to hear John the Apostle. Papias' own words, preserved by Eusebius, show he heard Ariston and John the Presbyter. He explicitly distinguishes the presbyter from John the Apostle. Thus, Irenaeus' description is almost certainly incorrect and repeats and represents an attempt to strengthen his doctrinal agenda. Irenaeus never quotes Papias on Mark, Matthew, or anything else. If Irenaeus had truly read Papias' full work, he would likely have used the following traditions: Mark not in order, Matthew composing the Hebrew logia, and the 2 Johns, the oral tradition methodology as well. These would have been extremely valuable for Irenaeus' apologetic program, but of course he never uses them as well. So what's his proximity to these writings? Has he not read them, or maybe he's just using them fully knowing that they don't help Christianity at all? So this pattern matches Irenaeus' rhetorical strategy elsewhere. Throughout against heresies, Irenaeus exaggerates apostolic connections, constructs genealogies of authority where none previously existed, elevates Polycarp's proximity to John, builds apostolic succession lists ex nihilo, uses metaphors, 4 winds, 4 corners to justify the 4 gospel canon, in a kind of poetic sense, but where's the evidence? Attributes oral tradition to the apostles without documentation. Involving Papias fits perfectly into this pattern. So, the conclusion then, finishing up. The most historically coherent interpretation is that Irenaeus uses Papias as a rhetorical authority, not a historical witness, to provide apostolic weight for this millennial or millenarian teaching, to bolster doctrines for which he lacked genuine evidence, to construct a lineage from John to Polycarp to Irenaeus and the great church then. Irenaeus thus mentions Papias not because Papias independently proved anything, but because Papias could be positioned as an apostolic surrounding figure. This supports Irenaeus' own theological program. Now, how to finish up? It's a really here we go. Papias Logia here represents a gospel type narrative, but a world for oracular Jesus sayings, visionary eschatology and folklore. So maybe these sayings are going around, but he doesn't realize they're not actually connected to a tradition of an earthly Jesus. And then why wouldn't Eusebius use it if it did? It just sounds so strange. This emerges from the emerging Orthodox Church. Chose not to preserve. Okay, so it didn't preserve it. We possess 7 unique direct quotes from Papias. These come entirely from Eusebius, and then 1, of course, with Irenaeus, but he's copying Eusebius. Papias' surviving material consists heavily. Irenaeus comes first. So Eusebius is copying Irenaeus, maybe, or just using that because he knows it's a big thing that Papias does. The surviving material consists heavily of mystical, prophetic, or miraculous stories and sayings. His statement about Mark and Matthew do not support later canonical orthodoxy. His work was lost because the church found it theologically dangerous, folkloric, and embarrassing, not authoritative. Okay, Papias thus stands not as a guardian of apostolic tradition, but as a window into the earliest Christian oracular law, visionary imagination, and he says as much, he uses these words, an uncontrolled oral rumour, a world that later orthodoxy tried to suppress or forget. All right, thank you.